Chapter 1, The Quiet Architecture of Trust. Before anyone whispered his name with caution, before unmarked cars began appearing at the edges of his routine, Daniel Arendt believed in order. Not the loud, ceremonial kind of order, the kind displayed in speeches or framed in marble buildings, but the quiet architecture beneath it. The systems no one saw. The numbers that moved invisibly through networks. The rules written in dense language and footnotes, designed to keep the machinery of a nation steady and fair. Daniel trusted those things. At 42, he had built his life around them. He lived alone on the fourth floor of a modest brick building overlooking a narrow stretch of Merrow Bay's inner harbor. The apartment was small but symmetrical, a rectangular living room with a wide window facing east, a galley kitchen with pale tile floors, a bedroom just large enough for a queen bed and a tall bookshelf. The walls were painted an off-white that caught the morning light gently, turning warm gold at sunrise. He woke each weekday at 5:45 a.m., not because he had to, but because he preferred the stillness before the city stirred. The alarm tone was soft, a low chime that faded in gradually. He would lie still for a moment after it stopped, listening. The building had its own language at that hour. Pipes ticking faintly. A distant elevator hum. The soft creak of someone upstairs crossing a hardwood floor. Beyond the glass, the harbor exhaled, a low mechanical sigh from docked ships and the muted slap of water against pylons. Daniel would rise, slide his feet into slippers, and move toward the kitchen with unhurried precision. He measured coffee grounds carefully, never guessing, never approximating. 3 rounded spoonfuls. Water heated just below a boil. The stainless steel press waited on the counter like a ritual object. He didn't rush the steeping. He watched the dark swirl settle. He pressed slowly. While the coffee cooled, he stood by the window and looked out at the cranes lining the port. In the early light they resembled skeletal birds, frozen mid-flight. Beyond them, low industrial complexes stretched toward the horizon, refineries, chemical storage facilities, processing plants. Their silhouettes were softened by distance, but he knew their structures intimately from the data he reviewed each day. Some mornings, thin plumes rose from stacks into the gray sky. Controlled releases, reported and regulated. Legal. Within limits. He believed in limits. On the dining table near the window sat a framed photograph of his younger sister, Lena. It had been taken a decade earlier at a beach south of the city. She was laughing at something off camera, shoulders bare to the sun, hair caught in motion by coastal wind. The photo was slightly faded now, but the expression remained clear, open, unguarded joy. Lena had moved away years ago, settling inland where the air was dry and the skyline free of smokestacks. They spoke every Sunday evening. Their conversations were rarely dramatic. She asked about his work, he asked about her students, she taught art at a public high school. She teased him about his seriousness. "You care about rules the way other people care about sports," she had once told him, laughing. "You track them like they're alive." "They are alive," he had replied gently. "They affect real people." She'd grown quiet then. "Just don't let them be the only thing you care about." He hadn't answered. By 6:30, Daniel was dressed in pressed slacks and a pale blue shirt, sleeves buttoned at the wrist. He favored neutral colors, nothing loud, nothing distracting. He packed a simple lunch, apple slices, almonds, a turkey sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper. The routine grounded him. Predictability was a kind of peace. The walk to the bureau took 12 minutes. He preferred walking over driving. The air along the harbor path carried a blend of salt, metal, and fuel, an industrial scent that many found unpleasant. Daniel did not. It smelled like infrastructure. Like work being done. Merrow Bay's Federal Environmental Compliance Bureau occupied a mid-century concrete building set back from the waterfront. Its facade was functional rather than beautiful, wide windows, horizontal lines, minimal ornamentation. The flag outside stirred faintly most mornings. Inside, the lighting was fluorescent and constant. The floors were polished tile, scuffed by decades of foot traffic. Security required a badge scan at the entrance. The guard at the desk, Mr. Halpern, always greeted Daniel with a nod. "Morning, Arendt." "Morning." Daniel's workspace was part of a long open office divided into cubicles with gray partitions. The hum of computers blended with the faint whir of ventilation. On his desk, dual monitors, a government-issued keyboard, neatly stacked folders, a ceramic mug bearing the bureau's logo. His title, Senior Data Compliance Analyst, was printed on a small metal plate beside his cubicle entrance. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't visible to the public. But it mattered. Each day, facilities across the region submitted emissions data to the Bureau. Measurements of airborne particulates, sulfur dioxide levels, nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds. Numbers flowed in through secured channels, timestamped and archived. Daniel's job was to review them for consistency, flag anomalies, and generate compliance summaries for supervisory approval. Most submissions were routine. Minor fluctuations. Occasional technical notes explaining equipment recalibrations or maintenance adjustments. He did not assume wrongdoing where none was evident. He believed in the presumption of accuracy. But he also believed in patterns. Patterns were honest in a way people sometimes were not. Late one September afternoon, as the sun angled low and turned the office windows pale orange, Daniel noticed a slight irregularity in a quarterly submission from Harbolite Energy's East Terminal refinery. The sulfur dioxide readings for June had spiked sharply on 3 consecutive days, exceeding regulatory thresholds by a measurable margin. That, by itself, was not unheard of. Unexpected operational malfunctions could cause temporary surges. What caught his attention was the amendment filed 48 hours later. The revised data showed lower values. Just below the threshold. The explanation cited a sensor calibration error. Daniel leaned closer to his screen. He accessed the metadata log. The original submission had been uploaded at 11:14 p.m. on a Friday. The amendment was timestamped Sunday at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the automated reporting deadline. He frowned slightly, not with suspicion but curiosity. He cross-checked internal audit notes. No independent verification had yet been requested. He flagged the file for review. It was small. Procedural. Still, he felt a faint tightening behind his ribs. At 4:45 p.m., his supervisor, Margaret Ionescu, passed by his cubicle. "You staying late again?" she asked gently. "Just finishing up a review." Margaret paused, resting a hand lightly on the partition wall. She had a calm presence, measured voice, steady gaze. Her tenure at the Bureau spanned nearly 3 decades. "Don't let the numbers follow you home," she said. "They'll still be here tomorrow." Daniel smiled faintly. "They usually are." After she left, he opened 2 additional quarterly reports from the same facility. He wasn't searching for wrongdoing. He was testing for consistency. Another amendment. Another late-hour revision. Each time adjusting figures downward, never dramatically, never in ways that would trigger automatic investigation, but consistently toward compliance. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. The adjustments could be legitimate. Equipment errors were common. Companies had incentives to avoid violations, but they also had reputations to maintain. Falsification would be reckless. Still. He printed the original and revised charts and placed them side by side on his desk. The red bars, indicating exceedances, vanished in the amended versions, replaced by neutral green. The change was subtle. But repetition gives subtlety weight. Outside the building, the sky had turned deep blue. The harbor lights flickered on, dotting the waterline. Daniel packed his bag more slowly than usual that evening. On his walk home, he found himself looking more carefully at the refinery stacks in the distance. They glowed faintly under industrial floodlights. A thin plume rose into the night. Within limits, he reminded himself. Within regulated parameters. Yet something about the timing of the amendments lingered in his thoughts like an unresolved equation. At home, he set his bag down and loosened his tie. The apartment felt as it always did, quiet, orderly, familiar. He reheated soup and ate standing at the counter, eyes occasionally drifting toward the harbor beyond the window. He told himself there was no cause for alarm. He had flagged the files. They would move through appropriate channels. If further audit was warranted, it would be assigned. That was how systems worked. Later, as he prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a reminder, "Call Lena, Sunday 8 p.m. He lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the revisions again, the precise timing, the careful margin beneath enforcement thresholds. He wondered briefly who had approved them. He wondered whether they had noticed the pattern. And somewhere beneath the steady rhythm of his breathing, a quiet thought surfaced, one he did not yet fully acknowledge. What if the system he trusted was adjusting itself in ways he was never meant to see? Outside, a car engine idled along the street for several minutes before finally pulling away. Daniel did not look out the window. He slept believing that diligence would be enough. He did not yet understand how easily numbers could be rewritten, and how quietly those who noticed could begin to vanish. Chapter 2, The First Fracture. The following week began like any other. Daniel arrived at the bureau at 7:12 a.m., badge clipped neatly to his belt, briefcase held close to his side. The air outside carried the sharp bite of late autumn. A low fog clung to the harbor, muting the outlines of cranes and refinery stacks. Ships emerged from it slowly, like shapes forming out of memory. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The hum of the building felt familiar, steady, like a heartbeat. He set his coffee down, logged into his terminal, and reopened the Harborlight files. The flagged submissions had already moved up the internal review chain. Margaret's digital acknowledgement appeared beneath his notes, brief and procedural. Received. Will review with compliance oversight. There was no additional comment. Daniel told himself that was normal. Supervisors often kept remarks minimal until further verification. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. He navigated deeper into the archive, beyond the recent quarter, beyond the year prior. He selected a random sampling of Harborlight submissions dating back 3 years. The pattern persisted. Initial uploads showing exceedances. Amendments filed shortly before reporting deadlines. Adjusted numbers, never drastically different, just enough to fall beneath enforcement triggers. He opened a spreadsheet and began mapping the revisions manually. Dates in one column. Original values in another. Revised figures in red. His movements were precise, controlled. But his pulse had begun to quicken. Patterns are not accusations, he reminded himself. They are invitations to ask better questions. At 9:30 a.m., an internal notification chimed on his screen. System maintenance scheduled, archive access limited from 10 to 11 a.m. Daniel frowned. Maintenance windows were usually scheduled after hours. He glanced around the office. A few co-workers muttered softly about sluggish server speeds. No one appeared alarmed. At 9:58 a.m., his access to the deep archive froze. A spinning wheel replaced the dataset. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, watching the clock tick toward 10 o'clock. Across the aisle, Thomas Caldwell, another analyst, rolled his chair closer. "You locked out too?" Thomas asked casually. "Archive access," Daniel replied. Thomas shrugged. "IT's been twitchy all week. Probably patching something. Do you remember reviewing Harborlight's East Terminal reports last year?" Daniel asked carefully. Thomas blinked. "Maybe. Why? Did you notice repeated amendments filed close to deadline?" Thomas studied him for a moment longer than expected. Companies amend data all the time, he said finally. It's not unusual. I know it's not unusual, Daniel said. I'm asking about frequency. Thomas's expression shifted, just slightly. You digging into something? He asked. Just routine cross-checking. Thomas gave a small, noncommittal nod and rolled back to his cubicle. The archive remained inaccessible until 11:17 a.m. When it returned, Daniel reopened the files he had been reviewing. 2 of the previously visible original submissions were no longer accessible. In their place, consolidated reports reflecting only the amended values. He stared at the screen. He checked the version history. The original upload logs still existed, but the raw datasets attached to them had been replaced with updated files, each bearing a new timestamp from 10:42 a.m. During the maintenance window. Daniel's mouth went dry. He printed what he could: revision logs, timestamp discrepancies, digital signatures attached to approvals. The printer beside his desk hummed steadily, spitting out page after page of black and white evidence. At 12:15 p.m., he knocked on Margaret's office door. Come in. Her office looked unchanged. The same potted plant. The same framed certifications. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds. I need clarification on something, Daniel began. She gestured for him to sit. He placed the printed pages on her desk, aligning them carefully. These raw datasets were accessible this morning, he said. They've now been replaced with consolidated versions that eliminate the original exceedance values. Margaret studied the papers without touching them. That would fall under data reconciliation, she said calmly. Without retaining original submissions. Originals are archived in central servers. I can't access them. She lifted her eyes to meet his. Daniel, she said softly, there are layers of review you're not privy to. He held her gaze. With respect, my role is to verify data integrity. If source files are altered during routine maintenance without documentation, that compromises integrity. Margaret inhaled slowly. You're assuming alteration, she replied. It may simply be system migration. Then where are the originals? Her silence was not immediate, but it was noticeable. You're a thorough analyst, she said after a moment. But you need to understand the broader landscape. Harbolite is under significant economic pressure. A public enforcement action based on potentially faulty sensor data could destabilize thousands of jobs. The law doesn't fluctuate based on job markets. Real life does. The words settled heavily between them. Daniel leaned back slightly. Are we prioritizing stability over compliance? Margaret's expression hardened, not angrily, but with something like warning. We are prioritizing measured response, she said. Escalation has consequences. For whom? He asked quietly. A faint knock interrupted them. A junior administrator stepped in with a folder requiring Margaret's signature. The moment dissolved. When Daniel returned to his desk, he found a small brown envelope resting atop his keyboard. No routing stamp. No return address. His hands moved more slowly than usual as he opened it. Inside was a printed screenshot of the very dataset he had just lost access to, the original June sulfur dioxide readings, highlighted in red. At the bottom, written in black ink. You're not imagining it. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He glanced around the office. No one was looking at him. Thomas typed steadily at his computer. A woman near the window laughed softly at something on her phone. The environment appeared unchanged. But something had fractured. Someone inside the bureau knew the data was being altered. And someone wanted him to know that he wasn't alone. That evening, Daniel left the building later than usual. The sky was already dark, the harbor lights reflected in rippling water. A cold wind cut across the walkway. He became aware of footsteps behind him. Measured. Unhurried. He slowed slightly. The steps slowed too. He turned casually, as if adjusting his coat. A man stood several yards back, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark overcoat. His expression was neutral, almost bored. They made brief eye contact. Then the man turned toward the parking lot. Daniel's heartbeat thudded in his ears. He told himself it meant nothing. The path was public. People walked it every night. Still, when he reached his apartment building, he scanned the street more carefully than usual. Inside, the air felt colder. He locked the door behind him and double-checked it, a habit he had never previously needed. He placed the envelope on his dining table beside Lena's photograph. For several minutes, he simply stood there, staring at the words. "You're not imagining it." His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Yes." A pause. Then a voice, calm, modulated, almost artificial. "Curiosity is admirable," it said. "But it can be dangerous when misdirected." Daniel's throat tightened. "Who is this?" "You're reviewing material outside your operational scope." "My operational scope is data integrity." A faint exhale came through the line. "Systems require flexibility," the voice continued. "Numbers are adjusted for context. You're seeing pieces without understanding the whole. Then explain the whole." Another pause. "That isn't your role." The line went dead. Daniel remained standing in his darkened kitchen long after the call ended. Outside, headlights passed intermittently along the street. He walked to the window and parted the curtain slightly. Across the road, a dark sedan idled with its engine running. Its windows were tinted. As he watched, the brake lights flared briefly. Then the car pulled away. Daniel closed the curtain and leaned back against the wall. For the first time in his life, the structure he trusted felt less like architecture, and more like a facade. He thought of Lena's voice, "Don't let them be the only thing you care about." He thought of Margaret's warning, "Escalation has consequences." And he thought of the envelope on his table, proof that someone inside the bureau was risking something to reach him. He did not sleep easily that night. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes clicked in the walls. Every distant engine sounded deliberate. Just before dawn, he rose from bed and sat at his desk. He opened a blank document. He began to copy everything he remembered: dates, file names, timestamps, approval codes. If the system could rewrite numbers, he would create his own record. The act felt small. But it was a beginning. Outside, the harbor lights flickered out one by one as morning approached. Daniel did not yet realize that by choosing to document what he had seen, he had stepped across an invisible line, one that others before him had crossed, and from which none had returned unchanged. Chapter 3: The Shape of the Truth. The envelope changed everything. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it confirmed. Daniel had spent his life believing that systems corrected themselves. That if a discrepancy appeared, it would move upward through the proper channels and resolve under scrutiny. He believed that the machinery of oversight, though imperfect, was fundamentally designed to protect the public. The envelope suggested something else. It suggested awareness. It suggested intention. And perhaps worst of all, it suggested complicity. For 3 nights after the phone call, Daniel barely slept. He lay in the dark listening to the ordinary sounds of his building, the elevator cables tightening, the distant thud of a neighbor closing a door, the wind pressing lightly against the windows. Every sound felt amplified, sharpened by anticipation. He began backing up files. Not on his bureau computer, that would have triggered alerts, but at home, from memory. He reconstructed spreadsheets from printed logs, typed out timestamps he had memorized, recreated amendment histories by hand. His dining table disappeared beneath neat stacks of paper. He purchased 2 encrypted flash drives from a small electronics shop across town, paying in cash. He told himself he was being cautious, not paranoid. At work, the atmosphere felt subtly altered. No one confronted him directly. No one mentioned his questions. But conversations quieted when he approached. Thomas no longer rolled his chair over to chat about server glitches. Margaret's door remained closed more often than usual. Meetings were held without him. The maintenance windows became more frequent. Each time they occurred, datasets shifted slightly, never dramatically, just enough to smooth irregularities into compliance. Red bars became yellow. Yellow became green. Daniel stopped flagging the revisions in the official system. Instead, he documented them privately. The sense of isolation deepened. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, Margaret summoned him to her office. He entered calmly, though his pulse hammered behind his ribs. She did not invite him to sit. "Have you shared internal materials with anyone outside the bureau?" she asked without preamble. The question hung in the air, cold and direct. "No," Daniel replied. "Have you discussed Harbolite revisions with members of the press?" "No." Her gaze searched his face as though weighing the texture of his answer. "There have been inquiries," she said carefully. "From individuals asking detailed questions about emission adjustments." Daniel's throat tightened. "Inquiries are common," he said evenly. "Transparency invites scrutiny." Margaret's expression flickered, fatigue, perhaps, or something closer to concern. "You need to stop," she said quietly. "Stop what?" "This." She gestured vaguely toward the walls, the building, the invisible network beyond it. "You're pulling on threads you don't understand. Then help me understand them." Her composure cracked, just slightly. "You think this is about numbers?" she asked. "You think it's about one refinery adjusting sulfur output? It's about compliance. It's about stability," she shot back. "You destabilize Harbolite, you destabilize port operations. You destabilize port operations, you impact federal contracts. You impact contracts, you impact national infrastructure. That doesn't justify falsifying data." "Nothing is falsified," she said sharply. "Data is contextualized." Daniel held her gaze. "By whom?" Silence. When she spoke again, her voice had lowered. "You need to let this go." "Why?" Her eyes softened, not with sympathy, but with something heavier. "Because people who don't," she said quietly, "don't stay." The words lingered long after he left her office. That evening, Daniel made a decision. He searched online for investigative journalists who had previously reported on regulatory capture and industrial compliance. One name surfaced repeatedly: Isabel Navarro. She worked for an independent publication based in Morro Bay. Her reporting had exposed procurement irregularities and offshore shell companies tied to municipal officials. She had a reputation for persistence, and for not folding under pressure. Daniel drafted an email from a newly created encrypted account. He did not accuse. He did not speculate. He simply wrote, "I have evidence of systematic data manipulation within a federal compliance bureau tied to Harbolite Energy. If you're willing to meet discreetly, I can provide documentation." He hesitated before sending it. Then he pressed send. The reply arrived 2 hours later. Public Library. Saturday. 2 p.m. West Reading Room. Bring nothing digital. Saturday arrived under a slate-gray sky. Daniel walked to the library rather than drive. The building's stone facade rose solemnly against the harbor wind. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust. Isabel Navarro sat alone at a long wooden table, a notebook open in front of her. She looked younger than he expected, mid-30s perhaps, with sharp, attentive eyes and dark curls pulled into a loose knot. "You're Daniel," she said quietly. He nodded. He placed a manila folder on the table between them. Inside were printed logs, reconstructed spreadsheets, version histories. Isabel examined them without interruption. "How certain are you?" she asked finally. "Certain enough to risk this," he replied. She studied him. "Why?" The question surprised him. "Because it's wrong," he said simply. She closed the folder. 3 people in the past 5 years have raised similar concerns in different agencies, she said. All tied to industrial compliance. 1 resigned abruptly. 1 accepted a position overseas and cut contact with colleagues. The 3rd disappeared. Daniel felt the air thin in his lungs. Disappeared how? Officially? Voluntary departure. Unofficially? No one has heard from him since. The library felt suddenly smaller. "Do you think it's connected?" Daniel asked. Isabel's expression was careful. "I think patterns matter." They agreed to communicate only through encrypted channels. She would cross-reference his documents with corporate filings and campaign contributions. He would continue documenting revisions. For the first time since the envelope appeared, Daniel felt something resembling direction. It lasted less than a week. On Wednesday morning, his building access badge failed to register. The guard at the entrance looked puzzled. "Must be a glitch," Mr. Halpern muttered, manually signing him in. Inside, Daniel's system credentials prompted him to reset his password due to security protocol updates. When he finally accessed the archive, half of the revision logs he had previously documented were gone. Not consolidated. Gone. Entire submission histories replaced by single summary files bearing compliance certification. He stared at the screen, pulse roaring in his ears. At 11:03 a.m., his phone vibrated. Unknown number. He stepped into an empty conference room before answering. "You were advised to stop," the voice said calmly. Daniel said nothing. "You misunderstand the scale of what you're touching." "I understand data," he replied quietly. A faint exhale. "This isn't about data. It's about leverage. About contracts. About supply chains that extend far beyond Morro Bay." "Then why hide it?" A pause. "Because the public doesn't understand nuance. And falsification is nuance." The line crackled slightly. "You have family," the voice said. Daniel's blood ran cold. The call ended. He stood in the conference room for several minutes, staring at the blank wall. They knew about Lena. The realization shifted something inside him, not fear alone, but clarity. This was not bureaucratic smoothing. This was coordinated protection. And protection implied something worth protecting. That evening, Daniel returned home to find his apartment door unlocked. He was certain he had locked it. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. Except for his dining table. The stacks of reconstructed documents were gone. In their place lay a single sheet of paper. No handwriting this time. Just a printed line in stark black ink. Last warning. Daniel sank slowly into the chair beneath Lena's photograph. The apartment felt unfamiliar, as though someone had rearranged its air. He looked toward the window. Across the street, a dark sedan idled with its headlights off. He did not approach the glass this time. He understood now. This was not about correcting a dataset. It was about erasing evidence of coordination between regulatory authority and industrial power. It was about preserving the illusion of oversight. And he had stepped too close to the mechanism that maintained it. Daniel rose slowly and retrieved the second encrypted flash drive from his bookshelf, hidden behind a row of policy manuals. He had kept one copy elsewhere. He sat at his desk and began typing a detailed account of everything that had happened, the envelope, the calls, Margaret's warning. If something happened to him, there needed to be a record. Not just of numbers. But of pressure. Of threat. Of disappearance. Outside, the sedan's engine finally turned over. It drove away without headlights, dissolving into the night. Daniel kept typing long after midnight. He understood now that systems did not merely correct themselves. Sometimes they corrected the people who questioned them. And for the first time since this began, he allowed himself to confront a possibility he had resisted. The others hadn't left voluntarily. They had been removed. And if he continued, he would not simply lose his job. He would lose his place in the world entirely. Chapter 4, The Night Without Witnesses. The night Daniel decided to move the evidence out of his apartment, the harbor was unnaturally still. No wind. No fog. Even the cranes along the port stood motionless, outlined against a sky the color of bruised steel. The refinery stacks pulsed with low red lights, steady and indifferent. Inside his apartment, the air felt tight, compressed by the weight of decision. He had stopped pretending this was temporary. The phone calls. The erased archives. The missing documents from his table. There would be no internal correction. No quiet acknowledgement from oversight committees. No moment when someone higher up would lean back in their chair and admit the revisions had gone too far. The system was not malfunctioning. It was functioning exactly as designed. Daniel sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop illuminating the edges of Lena's photograph. Her smile, frozen in time, felt like a memory from another life. He had already sent encrypted copies of everything to Isabel. Not all at once. Not in one dramatic transfer. Small fragments, staggered over days. Emission logs. Amendment timestamps. Internal emails referencing contextual adjustments. Enough to form a pattern. Enough to suggest orchestration. But he kept one full archive offline, on a flash drive hidden inside the hollow spine of a thick environmental policy textbook. He removed it now. The plastic felt colder than it should have. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. At 8:47 p.m., his phone vibrated. Isabel. "They're moving," she said without greeting. Daniel remained silent, listening to the faint echo in her voice. She was outside somewhere. "What do you mean?" "I confirmed campaign donation flows tied to Harbolite subsidiaries. The amounts align exactly with quarters where compliance exceedances were revised downward." He closed his eyes briefly. "How high does it go?" "High enough that this won't stay local." A pause. "You need to assume they know I'm working with you," she added quietly. "They already do," he said. Silence thickened between them. "I'm publishing," she said. "When?" "Monday morning." Daniel glanced toward the window. Across the street, no car idled tonight. No headlights lingered. "They won't let it reach Monday untouched," he said. "They can't erase it all," she replied. "Once it's live, it spreads." He admired her certainty. Or maybe it wasn't certainty. Maybe it was refusal. "I have a complete archive offline," he said. "If something happens." "Don't say that." "If something happens," he continued evenly, "you need to release everything at once." Another pause. "Where are you?" she asked. "At home." "You shouldn't stay there." He knew she was right. At 9:12 p.m., Daniel left his apartment. He did not pack a suitcase. That would have implied escape. He took only the flash drive and a thin folder containing handwritten notes, dates, times, details no server could erase. The hallway outside his door felt longer than usual. The overhead light flickered once before steadying. His footsteps echoed too loudly against the tile floor. In the lobby, the night clerk glanced up briefly, then returned to his phone. Outside, the air was sharp and metallic. Daniel chose to walk. The parking lot across from his building was half-lit, shadows stretching between vehicles. He moved past it without hesitation, turning instead toward the seawall path that paralleled the harbor. The water was black, reflecting only scattered lights from anchored ships. Each step carried the faint crunch of gravel beneath his shoes. His thoughts were unusually clear. Fear had not vanished. It had settled into something colder, focus. He understood now that the fight was no longer about proving data manipulation. It was about whether truth could survive coordination at scale. Behind him, an engine started. He did not turn. The sound followed slowly, deliberate, matching his pace without overtaking him. He kept walking. The path narrowed near an abandoned pier slated for redevelopment. Construction fencing lined one side, the dark drop to the water lined the other. The engine cut off. Silence. Then footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. Daniel stopped. The footsteps stopped as well. He turned. 3 men stood several yards behind him. Not hurried. Not aggressive. Just present. Their faces were partially shadowed by the low industrial lighting. Their coats were dark. Their posture relaxed. One of them stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Arendt," he said calmly. The voice was familiar, not identical to the one on the phone, but similar in tone. Controlled. Smoothed of emotion. Daniel did not respond. "You've been very persistent," the man continued. "That's admirable." "Is it?" Daniel asked quietly. The man's expression did not change. "You misunderstand the scale of the mechanisms involved. I understand falsified emissions data." A faint smile touched the man's mouth. "You understand numbers. Not leverage." Daniel's pulse thudded steadily, but he kept his voice level. "You're contaminating entire communities to preserve contracts. That's a dramatic interpretation. It's accurate." The other 2 men shifted subtly, closing distance without obvious threat. "There are trade-offs in governance," the first man said. "Economic stability prevents greater harm. By allowing smaller harm." Daniel countered. "By managing perception." The words landed with chilling simplicity. Daniel's hand brushed the inside of his coat where the flash drive rested. "You won't stop publication," he said. The man tilted his head slightly. "Publication is inconvenient," he replied. "But manageable." "How?" "Discrediting sources. Questioning authenticity. Redirecting narratives." Daniel felt a hollow recognition bloom in his chest. "And me?" he asked. A pause. "You've already isolated yourself." That was true. He had not told Lena. Had not told friends. Had not spoken openly to colleagues. "You can still walk away," the man said softly. "And pretend it never happened. Accept that you misinterpreted routine adjustments." Daniel almost laughed. "You erased original submissions. Archival consolidation. You threatened my family." The man's gaze sharpened. "No one threatened anyone," he said. "We clarified potential consequences." The distinction was grotesque. Behind them, the harbor lights flickered faintly. "People before me," Daniel said slowly. "What happened to them?" For the first time, something like impatience crossed the man's face. "Some chose new opportunities," he said. "Some stepped back. And the one who vanished?" Silence. Daniel felt the weight of it. "You believe disappearance is dramatic," the man said finally. "It's often administrative." Administrative. The word echoed in Daniel's mind. Erased from payroll. Removed from systems. Declared voluntary departure. No body required. "You don't need to do this," the man continued. "You're intelligent. You could transition quietly. Consulting. Academia. A clean exit." "And the data?" Daniel asked. "It will be contextualized." The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint smell of fuel from the refineries. Daniel understood something then, not intellectually, but physically. He was standing at the edge of a structure too large to dismantle alone. This confrontation was not meant to negotiate. It was meant to demonstrate inevitability. "You're wrong about one thing," Daniel said quietly. The man waited. "I'm not alone." A flicker, brief but real, crossed the man's eyes. In the distance, faint sirens wailed, unclear whether near or far. The moment stretched thin. Then headlights flared at the far end of the path. A vehicle approached slowly, its beams cutting through the darkness. The three men glanced toward it. An interruption. Unexpected. The approaching vehicle slowed near the construction fencing. Its window rolled down slightly. A woman's voice called out sharply. "Daniel! Isabel!" The men did not retreat, but their posture shifted. Daniel stepped back instinctively, increasing the space between himself and them. The first man's composure returned instantly. "This conversation is unfinished," he said calmly. "Not tonight," Isabel shouted. The sirens grew louder now, closer. Whether coincidence or orchestration, Daniel could not tell. The men stepped backward in unison. "Consider your options carefully," the man said. Then they turned and walked toward the shadows beyond the pier. No running. No panic. Just disappearance into darkness. Daniel stood frozen until Isabel's car door slammed and she reached him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, gripping his shoulders. "No." Her eyes scanned the path behind him. "Who were they?" "Representatives," he said quietly. "Of?" "The architecture." The sirens passed along a parallel street, never turning toward the harbor. The night settled again into unnatural calm. Isabel looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this began. "They're not going to stop," she said. "No," he replied. "And neither are we." Daniel glanced once more toward the shadows where the men had vanished. He understood now that the climax was not a single explosive event. It was pressure, applied slowly, strategically, until resistance fractured. He felt the fracture forming inside himself. Not fear. Not yet. But the recognition that survival and truth were diverging paths. Isabel drove him away from the harbor that night. Behind them, the refinery lights burned steadily. Unchanged. Unbothered. And somewhere within the machinery of contracts and committees, a decision was being made, quietly, administratively, about what would become of Daniel Arendt. Chapter 5, What the Water Keeps. The article went live at 6 a.m. on a Monday. Mero Bay was still half asleep when Isabel pressed the final key. Outside her apartment, dawn was only beginning to loosen the grip of night. The harbor lay in a sheet of muted gray, cranes suspended in silhouette, refinery stacks breathing thin plumes into the pale sky. The headline was precise. Not dramatic. Not speculative. It did not accuse, it demonstrated. It presented timelines of revised emissions data. It mapped amendment timestamps against campaign donations. It cited internal language referencing, contextualized compliance thresholds. It included corroborated documentation from multiple quarters, multiple facilities. And, near the center of the piece, it mentioned Daniel Arendt. Not as a hero. Not as a martyr. As a senior compliance analyst who had identified discrepancies and who was now missing. Isabel read the paragraph 3 times before publishing. Then she clicked. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the notifications began. Shares. Comments. Direct messages. Competing outlets requesting confirmation. Environmental advocacy groups amplifying the link. A national investigative network asking for source verification. The story moved fast. By 8:12 a.m., Harbolite Energy released a statement calling the report misleading and based on incomplete technical understanding. By 9:03 a.m., the Federal Environmental Compliance Bureau issued a brief press release expressing deep concern regarding Daniel's disappearance and affirming its commitment to transparent operations. By 10:40 a.m., 2 state senators announced a preliminary inquiry into regulatory practices. The machinery of response engaged with startling speed. But Daniel did not see any of it. Because Daniel was no longer in Morro Bay. The last confirmed sighting of him came from a grainy security camera mounted above a fuel station near the interstate, captured at 2:17 a.m. on the Sunday before publication. The footage showed a man matching his description walking alone along the edge of the property. He appeared calm, unhurried. Then the camera glitched. 7 seconds of distortion. When the image returned, the man was gone. No vehicle was visible entering or exiting during the interruption. No official explanation was ever offered for the glitch. By noon on Monday, Daniel Arendt was officially declared missing. Again. Only this time, it was public. Isabel did not sleep that week. She moved between interviews, calls with national reporters, meetings with attorneys who cautioned her about defamation exposure. She kept her phone charging at all times. She avoided returning home before midnight. The flash drive Daniel had given her, the full offline archive, remained in a safety deposit box at a credit union outside the city. On Wednesday, she was summoned to testify before a hastily assembled oversight panel. The hearing room was cold and brightly lit. Cameras lined the back wall. Officials spoke in measured tones about procedural clarification and interagency communication. When Isabel's turn came, she laid out the evidence carefully. Not emotionally. Methodically. She referenced revision logs. Showed timestamp discrepancies. Mapped donation flows. Explained the pattern of downward adjustments just beneath enforcement thresholds. A senator interrupted her halfway through. "Ms. Navarro, are you suggesting intentional wrongdoing at the federal level?" "I'm suggesting coordinated leniency with material environmental consequences," she replied. "Based on what?" "Based on data." The room quieted. Another official leaned forward. "And what about Mr. Arendt's disappearance? Are you implying a connection?" Isabel held the gaze. "I'm stating that he raised documented concerns internally. He received threats. His materials were removed from his home. He disappeared days before publication." The official nodded slowly. "Speculation can be dangerous," he said. "So can silence," she answered. The hearing adjourned with promises of further review. Outside the building, cameras flashed. Microphones pressed toward her face. "Do you believe Daniel Arendt is alive?" someone asked. Isabel paused. "I believe he tried to do the right thing," she said carefully. It was not an answer. But it was the only honest one she had. Weeks passed. The national attention peaked, then plateaued. Committees formed subcommittees. Reports were commissioned. Language softened. Intentional falsification became procedural inconsistency. Regulatory capture became collaborative oversight. Threats became miscommunication. No criminal indictments followed. Harbolite Energy's stock dipped briefly, then recovered. The Bureau announced restructuring. Margaret Ionescu's retirement was described as long-planned. A new director was appointed, promising renewed transparency. Daniel's missing person case remained open. But inactive. Lena flew to Morro Bay 2 weeks after the article went live. She stood in Daniel's apartment for a long time without speaking. The air inside felt still, as though it had been waiting. His books remained aligned. His coffee press sat clean on the counter. The photograph of her on the dining table had not moved. She touched the frame gently. He wouldn't just leave, she told Isabel. "I know," Isabel replied. They walked the seawall together at dusk. The wind off the harbor was colder now. Winter approaching. Lena stopped near the abandoned pier, the place Daniel had described in his final encrypted message to Isabel. He said they spoke about leverage, Isabel told her softly. Lena stared at the water. He always believed systems could be fixed, she said. They can, Isabel replied. Can they? The question lingered in the air between them. 3 months after publication, Isabel received a package. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small memory card. Her hands did not tremble when she opened it. The paper contained one sentence. Follow the revisions. The memory card held a short audio file. The recording was faint. Wind in the background. Footsteps on gravel. Then Daniel's voice. Calm. Steady. If you're hearing this, he said, it means the record wasn't enough. A pause. They don't erase you violently. They erase you administratively. Another pause. They remove access. They rewrite entries. They correct you out of existence. The wind grew louder. I don't know how far this reaches, he continued. But I know it reaches beyond Morro Bay. The recording ended abruptly. Isabel sat in silence for a long time. The metadata showed the file had been created the night of the confrontation at the pier. No location data remained. She released the audio publicly the following morning. It reignited attention, but more briefly this time. Skeptics questioned authenticity. Officials dismissed it as unverified material. The world moved on. It always did. Years later, the refinery stack still rose above Morro Bay. Emissions reports still arrived quarterly. Most were compliant. A few showed minor exceedances. All were revised, if necessary, within acceptable thresholds. You could walk the seawall at sunset and see nothing unusual. Children still played near the docks. Fishermen still cast lines into the tide. The crane still turned slowly against the sky. If you asked about Daniel Arendt, some would remember. They would say he was meticulous. Serious. Principled. Some would say he overstepped. Some would say he misunderstood complexity. Others would lower their voices and glance around before speaking. The official record lists him as a missing person. No foul play suspected. No confirmed evidence of coercion. Case status, open. But inactive. Isabel still keeps a copy of his notebook in her desk drawer. On the final page, written in his careful handwriting. If something happens to me, follow the revisions. Sometimes she rereads it at night. Not because she expects new meaning to appear. But because it reminds her that truth does not always disappear loudly. Sometimes it is adjusted. Smoothed. Contextualized. Corrected until it fits. And somewhere beneath layers of amended data, beneath green compliance bars and polished press releases, the original numbers still exist. Waiting. Because the most dangerous thing Daniel ever discovered was not that emissions were altered. It was that the system did not need to silence everyone. It only needed to make them vanish quietly enough that the water kept the rest.